Quebec isn't just a province, it's a fortress. Behind the cobblestone streets of Old Montreal and the glass towers of downtown, there exists a level of wealth so old, so entrenched that most Canadians have no idea it even exists. This is money that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. While tech billionaires in Toronto flash their wealth on social media, Quebec's true elite are writing checks to preserve centuries-old estates and quietly controlling industries that built the nation. These families don't chase trends. They own the infrastructure. They bought the land when it was wilderness, built the railroads, controlled the ports, and shaped the laws that govern commerce to this day. If you want to understand real generational wealth, forget the startup unicorns. Look north. Look to the dynasty that has dominated Quebec for over 300 years. Before we reveal who sits at the very top, make sure you subscribe. We're uncovering the hidden empires that control the world's wealthiest cities, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The story of Quebec's richest old money family begins not in boardrooms, but in battlefields. Not with stock options, but with royal land grants. To understand their power, you have to go back to the 1600s when New France was being carved out of the wilderness. The French crown needed settlers, soldiers, and administrators to hold its claim against the British. In exchange for loyalty and service, the king granted massive tracts of land called seigneuries. These weren't small plots, we're talking about entire regions. The families who received these grants became the founding aristocracy of Quebec. They collected rents from tenant farmers, controlled the mills, managed the river access, and essentially functioned as feudal lords. When the British conquered New France in 1763, most people assumed the French elite would be swept away. But something remarkable happened. The British allowed the seigneurial system to continue. They needed the cooperation of the French landowners to keep the colony stable. So the old money families adapted. They learned English, married into British merchant families, and quietly maintained their economic dominance. This ability to evolve while preserving power is the hallmark of true old money. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution. While other families were losing their fortunes to bad investments and subdivision of estates among too many heirs, one family in particular made a series of calculated moves that would cement their position for generations. They diversified out of just land and into the industries that were exploding across Canada: railroads, shipping, banking, manufacturing. They understood early that the future wasn't just about owning soil, it was about controlling the movement of goods and capital. They became silent partners in ventures that built the Canadian Pacific Railway, the very backbone of the nation's economy. They financed lumber operations that clear-cut entire forests and shipped the timber to build cities across North America. They invested in the nascent banking sector, becoming founding shareholders in institutions that are now pillars of Canadian finance. But here's the genius. They almost never put their name on anything. While the Rockefellers and Carnegies were building monuments to themselves, Quebec's elite were building monopolies in silence. By the early 1900s, this family had transitioned from land barons to industrial titans. They controlled paper mills in the Mauricie region, factories in Montreal, and commercial real estate in Quebec City. During both world wars, they made fortunes supplying materials to the military: uniforms, boots, canned goods, machinery. War is tragedy for most, but for old money families with the right connections, it's an economic accelerator. They were patriotic, of course. They sent their sons to fight, but their factories ran triple shifts, and the contracts signed during those years laid the foundation for post-war expansion. After 1945, they pivoted again. They saw the rise of the suburbs and invested heavily in real estate development. They bought farmland on the outskirts of Montreal for pennies and watched it turn into shopping centers and housing developments worth millions. They also moved into media, acquiring newspapers and later radio stations, giving them not just economic power but cultural influence. The ability to shape public opinion is priceless, especially in a province as politically complex as Quebec. The Quiet Revolution of the 1960s changed everything in Quebec. The Catholic Church lost its grip on education and social services. The government expanded rapidly. Nationalism surged. French became the dominant language of business by law. Many English-speaking families packed up and moved to Toronto. But the true old money families of Quebec didn't run. They adapted again. They had French roots, French names, and deep ties to the Quebecois establishment. They supported the language laws publicly while quietly maintaining their English business networks. They funded both federalist and separatist politicians, ensuring they had allies no matter which way the wind blew. This is the ultimate old money strategy. Never pick a side that could destroy you. Hedge your bets. They also began shifting wealth offshore and into trusts that were legally bulletproof. By the time the tax authorities tried to keep up, these families were already operating through Cayman Islands, holding companies and Swiss accounts. Today, estimating their exact wealth is nearly impossible, and that's by design. Unlike the publicly traded empires of the Westons or the Thompsons, Quebec's oldest family fortunes are locked in private companies, trusts, and foundations. They don't appear on Forbes lists. They don't do press interviews. The closest analysts can estimate is that their combined holdings across real estate, industry, and investments exceed $5 billion, but that's likely a severe undercount. When you own entire buildings in Old Montreal that have been in the family since the 1800s, when you control private equity stakes in companies that don't report earnings publicly, when your art collection includes original works from the French masters acquired centuries ago, how do you even calculate net worth? You can't. The family estate alone, a sprawling property along the St. Lawrence River, is worth tens of millions, but has never been appraised because it's never been sold. It's been passed down through generations, each time restructuring the inheritance to avoid taxes. But wealth without influence is just money. What makes this family the richest old money dynasty in Quebec is their invisible hand in the province's power structure. They sit on the boards of the major banks. They are silent partners in development projects that reshape Montreal's skyline. They fund university chairs and hospital wings, ensuring their name is associated with prestige and charity, not excess. They are patrons of the arts, sponsoring the Montreal Symphony Orchestra and the Museum of Fine Arts. Every major political figure in Quebec, whether federalist or sovereigntist, has at some point attended a dinner at their estate. These aren't public events. There are no photographers. But deals are made. Appointments are discussed. The family doesn't need to lobby the government. The government comes to them. This is soft power at its most refined. When a new subway line is proposed, they already own land along the route. When a historic district is rezoned, their properties benefit. It's not corruption. It's 6 generations of strategic positioning. Their children don't become Instagram influencers or startup founders. They go to McGill, then Harvard or Oxford. They study law, finance, or history. They marry other old money families, often from Toronto, New York, or Europe, expanding the network further. The weddings are private, held in family chapels or historic estates. The guest lists read like a who's who of North American aristocracy. After university, they join the family office, a private investment firm that manages the fortune. They learn the same lessons their great-great-grandfathers learned. Never sell land unless you absolutely must. Diversify across industries and borders. Stay out of the headlines. Cultivate relationships, not brands. The family office employs some of the best lawyers and accountants in Canada. Their sole job is to preserve and grow the fortune while minimizing tax and public exposure. They use every legal tool available. Income splitting, charitable trusts, offshore structures, family foundations. It's not evasion, it's optimization at the highest level. The family also understands legacy in a way that new money never does. They don't just think about the next quarter or the next election cycle. They think in centuries. They've survived the fall of New France, the British conquest, 2 world wars, the Quiet Revolution, multiple referendums on Quebec independence, and every economic crash in between. They didn't survive by being reckless. They survived by being patient, strategic, and invisible. When separatist sentiment was at its peak in the 1990s and businesses were fleeing Montreal, they stayed. They bought properties other people were panicking to sell. When the referendum failed and confidence returned, they made a fortune. This is the advantage of old money. You don't need to react, you can wait. You have reserves that can last decades. You don't have investors screaming for returns. You answer to no one but your own bloodline. Their influence extends beyond economics into culture and identity. They have funded the preservation of French language institutions. They've donated millions to restore historic churches and landmarks that define Quebec's heritage. In doing so, they've woven themselves into the cultural fabric of the province. You can't talk about Quebec's history without acknowledging their role. And that's exactly how they want it, not as villains or oligarchs, but as stewards. As families who have carried the torch of Quebec's identity through centuries of change. Whether that narrative is entirely true is debatable. But perception is reality, especially when you control the narrative. They fund the historians who write the textbooks. They endow the journalism schools. They sponsor the documentaries. In a very real sense, they have shaped how Quebec remembers itself. There is also a darker side that cannot be ignored. Old money in Quebec, as in many places, was often built on exploitation. The seigneurial system was feudal. Tenant farmers paid rents to landlords who did little but collect. The lumber and paper industries devastated forests and displaced indigenous communities. The factories that made fortunes during the industrial age paid workers poverty wages and fought bitterly against unions. During the Duplessis era, when corruption and authoritarianism defined Quebec politics, old money families were often complicit, funding campaigns and benefiting from sweetheart deals. They didn't get rich by being nice. They got rich by being ruthless. And then over generations, they laundered that ruthlessness into respectability through philanthropy and public service. It's a playbook as old as wealth itself. The robber barons become the philanthropists. The profiteers become the patrons. In recent years, the family has faced new challenges. Quebec has become more progressive, more skeptical of inherited privilege. Wealth taxes are being debated. Transparency laws are tightening. The younger generation is more likely to question the morality of concentrated wealth. Some heirs have even broken from tradition, pursuing careers in activism or the arts rather than finance. There have been quiet family rifts, though nothing that ever makes the press. The family office has lawyers whose only job is to keep scandals out of the media. Settlements are paid. NDAs are signed. The facade remains intact, but the pressure is real. In a world of increasing inequality, being invisibly rich is getting harder. Social media makes secrecy difficult. Leaks happen, activists dig. The old playbook of silence and influence might not work forever. Still, for now, they remain at the top. They are the richest old money family in Quebec, not because they have the most cash, but because they have the most durability. They have survived and thrived for over 3 centuries. They have adapted to every political and economic shift without losing their core assets. They have passed wealth down through generations using structures so sophisticated that even forensic accountants struggle to unravel them. They have built a network so deep that their influence touches every major institution in the province. They don't need to be on the cover of magazines. They own the printing presses. They don't need political office. They fund the campaigns. They are the embodiment of what old money truly means. Not just wealth, but legacy. Not just assets, but power that transcends any single lifetime. So while new money chases exits and IPOs, while tech billionaires build rockets and buy social networks, Quebec's oldest dynasty does what it has always done. It buys land, it builds relationships, it stays quiet, and it endures. Because in the end, the families that last aren't the loudest. They're the ones you never see coming. They're the ones who own the ground you're standing on and the institutions you trust, and you didn't even know their name until now. That's not just wealth, that's dominion. And in Quebec, one family has perfected it across 300 years. Now, you might be wondering what this means for the average person living in Quebec today. The reality is that old money families like this one operate in a realm so removed from everyday life that most people never directly encounter their influence. Yet it shapes everything around you. When you rent an apartment in Montreal, there's a decent chance the building's ultimate owner traces back to a family trust controlled by one of these dynasties. When you drive on a highway, the land it was built on may have been acquired by strategic purchases made decades ago. When you attend a university or visit a hospital, the buildings themselves may have been funded by donations from these families, ensuring their names are etched into the institutional memory of the province for centuries to come. What makes this story particularly fascinating is how it challenges our modern understanding of wealth and power. We live in an age of transparency, or at least we think we do. We can track billionaires on real-time wealth counters. We follow their every move on social media. We debate their influence on politics and society with an intensity that previous generations never experienced. Yet despite all this supposed transparency, the wealthiest people in Canada remain almost completely invisible. The families who control the most capital, who have the deepest roots, who exercise the most subtle and pervasive influence, are the ones nobody talks about. They've mastered the art of wealth preservation in a way that makes modern billionaires look like amateurs playing dress up in their parents' clothes. This invisibility is not accidental. It's the result of centuries of refinement and intentional strategy. When you have that much time and that much money, you can build systems designed specifically to keep you off the radar. You can hire the best lawyers to structure your holdings in ways that are perfectly legal but completely opaque to outsiders. You can fund think tanks and academic institutions that will frame your wealth as a natural outcome of merit and hard work rather than luck and timing and exploitation. You can shape the narrative so thoroughly that people don't even question whether you deserve what you have. They just assume that if you've held on to it for 300 years, you must have earned it somehow. The implications of this are profound. If the richest and most powerful people in a given region are invisible, then democracy itself becomes a kind of theater. Elections happen. Politicians campaign. Laws get passed. But the real decisions, the ones that matter, are made in private rooms by people whose names don't appear on any ballot. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's just how power has always worked at this level. The visible government is one thing. The invisible government, the networks of wealth and influence that exist above and beyond formal political structures, is another thing entirely. Quebec has both. The visible government changes every few years. The invisible government has been the same for 3 centuries. Understanding this also puts modern wealth inequality into perspective. We often talk about billionaires as though they represent the apex of wealth. But billionaires are, by definition, new money. They made their fortunes in their own lifetimes. That means they still have to manage their wealth actively. They have to make decisions. They have to defend their holdings. Families like the one we've been discussing don't have that problem. Their wealth has compounded over centuries. It's embedded in institutions and infrastructure. It doesn't require active management so much as passive preservation. And the longer you preserve wealth, the more power it gives you. Because power isn't just about having money. It's about having the connections, the institutions, and the networks that money creates over time. This also explains why these families rarely appear in the news. News is about conflict and change, but old money families are all about stability and consistency. They don't want change. They want things to stay exactly as they are, with them at the top. So they structure their lives and their fortunes in ways that minimize drama and maximize continuity. Their heirs don't get arrested. They don't have messy divorces that end up in court documents. They don't make risky business decisions that blow up publicly. They live carefully managed lives inside carefully constructed systems. And when something does go wrong, they have the resources to make sure it stays quiet. The younger members of these families face a particular kind of burden. They inherit not just wealth, but also responsibility. They inherit a name that carries centuries of history. They inherit a set of expectations about how to behave, where to go to school, what kind of career to pursue, whom to marry. They inherit a worldview that